We might like to measure some voltages inside our circuit. For that, our first tool is the digital voltmeter, DVM. I'm going to set this one on the 20 volts DC scale. And I've got a red probe and a black probe. The red probe, when the red probe is more positive than the black probe, the meter reads a positive number. So first I'm going to imagine reading the voltage across that LED. So I'll connect here and I'll connect here. And I'll read some voltage, maybe about 1.6 volts. And I could also measure the voltage across the 1 kilo ohm resistor. That might be, we'll find out, maybe 3.4 volts. I could indicate those measurements on the picture by saying, hey, I used a voltmeter here, and when I did, I measured 3.4 volts, and I used a voltmeter here, and when I did, I measured 1.6 volts. There's another instrument that's useful for measuring voltages too. And I should mention before I leave this one that if I measured the voltage from here to here, what would I read? I'd of course read 5 volts, and that is the sum of 3.4 and 1.6. So that voltage, 5 volts, is 1.6 of it is across here, the other 3.4 of it is across there. We have another tool too, which is on your scope face, which is on your laptop face, which is called an oscilloscope. So I'll just draw it in here. This is a scope. And unlike the DVM, which measures a difference in voltage between its two probes, the scope has only one probe. So if I take that scope probe and I connect it up over here, what's going on is that the scope is always measuring that voltage relative to ground. So here, that voltage relative to ground is 1.6, and the trace on the scope will go pop up to a level of 1.6 and just continue on across like that. If I want to measure the voltage across the 1K resistor with the scope, I can't very well do it. Here's why. I can disconnect the scope from that point and connect its lead up to here, let's say over to there, and you might think, I would like to measure the voltage across the 1 kilo ohm resistor. That's not what you're doing though. You're measuring the voltage at that point relative to ground because the scope's measurements are always relative to ground. So in that case, the scope trace is going to pop up to 5 volts and just stay there. You're measuring this voltage relative to ground, and that's 5 volts. So digital voltmeter measurements are especially good for measuring the voltage across something when neither end of that something is at ground. Here, in the case of the LED, you could measure it with the DVM and get 1.6, or you could measure it by connecting the scope up to that point and get 1.6 equivalently. But for measuring the voltage across the 1 kilo ohm resistor, the scope is really not very useful. You need to use the DVM, which is able to compare the voltage at two different points.